9. Death on delivery. Janet Kendall's scream froze on her lips as she stared down at the blood oozing from the wound in her side. For a split second she managed to look accusingly up at Zak Biko, then her body slumped against the cushions, and he knew the woman was dead. Swiftly he ran to the door, unlocking it and switching off the light in one swift movement. Wilson Keys slid into the room, but Zak was already at the curtains, pulling them aside, seeing only the empty square made by the silent removal of a single pane of glass. With a shrug he closed the curtains and turned to survey the dead body of the housekeeper. Both men knew that the shot would bring their own men running. Keys glanced at Zak, then he pulled his radio out and began to report Janet's death to the others who were racing towards the Harvey home. They heard the sirens even as they moved out into the hall, leaving the study door open. Inside the house, from upstairs among the shadows, no sound disturbed them. Sid had either collapsed or he had preferred not to come to his wife's aid. Wilson Keys, who wasn't a top executive in the special branch, and had no wish to bite off more than he could chew, waited for instructions. "Let them in, Wills. But tell Colonel Jones not to do more than see to that," he indicated the body in the study. "I'm going upstairs for a look round. They'll try chasing the gunman, but they'll be too late." Keys nodded and made for the front entrance. Already cars could be heard screeching to a stop by the steps. Zak Biko moved noiselessly up the carpeted staircase. Then his hand turned the knob on Linda Harvey's bedroom door. He knew which one it was from his last visit. Inside the luxurious bedroom, lit only by a shaded lamp beside the silk-covered bed, Linda Harvey in her transparent nightdress was a sight to please any man as she lay back on her pillows breathing gently. Zak Biko approached the bed with tightening lips. He reached out a hand to shake her awake, if indeed she was asleep. He suspected drugs, sleeping pills most likely, left behind for her use by Dr. Allard. Zak shook her again and this time there was some response. Linda moaned, turning away from the disturbing hand, but he kept at it. Finally, she turned back again, opening blurred eyes to stare up at him. "Wake up, Miss Harvey. There's been more trouble here." Zak spoke curtly. "What have you taken to make you sleep so soundly?" "What?" Linda struggled to sit up. Zak helped her, even plumping up her pillows. "What are you doing in my bedroom?" "Trying to wake you." Zak pulled up a chair. "Janet Kendall's been murdered." The brutality of this took the girl's breath away. "You're crazy. Who would murder Janet?" "I don't believe you." Linda's eyes were focusing now and there was strength in her voice. Zak shrugged. "Janet Kendall's scream should have brought the dead back to life. How come you could sleep through it?" "Ask Doc Allard. He gave me something. You may not know it but I'm already suffering from shock. You're in for several more, Miss Harvey. Where can we locate Jonah?" "He is your father, I understand." The girl looked surprised. "I have no father, and I don't know any Jonah. We've talked about this before. You're a very beautiful liar, Linda. But it won't do. Sid Kendall's talked." "Sid?" Linda passed a well-kept hand over her brow. "What has Sid to say about anything? I wonder. He seemed scared to death of his wife. Maybe I'd better take him in. On second thoughts, I feel that maybe Sid could be of more use to us here and now. Do what you like, Biko. Only get out of this room. If anything's happened to Janet, I must get up and see people. I don't want to, but this is my house now and..." Zak's reply took the blood from her face. "I wouldn't be too sure about that, Linda. The boy didn't die. He's safe and sound, and will live. Pity for you, but there it is." Zak waited, watching as color again touched the girl's lovely pallid skin. Finally, she said, "Mr. Biko. I haven't an idea what you mean." "What boy? And whether he lives or dies, what is that to me? He was shot in these grounds. I think he will tell us that he was invited here. Or maybe he escaped his kidnappers and ran here hoping that Franklin Harvey would protect him. But Franklin Harvey was already dead when you got home from New York. You found his body, remember? The girl in bed jumped nervously at the tone he used. Why? Yes. My guess is that you also know who killed your uncle. Zak brought his own face to within inches of hers. Linda shrank back into the pillows. She began to cry now, not loudly, but bitterly. The detective moved back, satisfied that she was breaking either from nerves or from the kind of fear that had seemed to motivate Sid Kendall. Stay in bed, Miss Harvey. The house is full of police. You'll be called when they want you. Stay there and rest. There is nothing you can do. As he turned away, she spoke. But you talked about a boy I should be interested in. What boy? I have a right to know. Zak grinned. So, have I. I'm playing a hunch, that's all. You want to take a bet on with me that Franklin Harvey's last will and testament might contain some surprises, even for you? There was a silence. And he was a boy the gang wanted dead? He heard her gasp as he left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Zak Biko stood outside on the landing for some time. Behind him there was no sound from Linda Harvey. Down below him in the well of the hallway he could see men moving about on their lawful police business. In the distance the wail of an approaching ambulance could be heard, and then Dr. Allard came in to be greeted by Wilson Keyes, who was still on duty as doorman. Still Zak made no move to join them. The study door opened, and Colonel Jones came into the light. He was talking to another man attached to his department. Every Harvey store in the country is in the hands of the police. Every store is being ransacked for drugs dangerous to the population that have been brought into America illegally. We intend to interrogate everyone above sales manager and even some below. They'll sing or bum. A killing's clean compared to dope pushing. Jack Jones was angry. He poked a finger at his companion's tie. It's this house and those who live in it that puzzle me. Where's Biko? He's supposed to be here. Wilson Keyes called out from his post. He's with the girl, sir. That fetched Dr. Allard from the study. I will not allow you to bother Miss Harvey. The doctor was red in the face and clucking. I cannot be held responsible if she is subjected to yet another shock. You don't have to be responsible for anything, Doc. Keyes indicated the body of Janet Kendall, except this. The police surgeon will be here shortly. Jack Jones tried to soothe the doctor. You just hang around. You'll be useful yet. What brought you here tonight, anyway? As if the thought had only just occurred to him, Jack Jones flung the question at Allard. I heard sirens. The doctor spoke nervously. I was on my way home from a night call. I'm responsible. His voice faded when the colonel walked away, ignoring him. Upstairs on the darkened landing, Zak Biko grinned in appreciation. Some way along the wall the gleam of a phone caught his eye. Lifting the receiver, Zak dialed his own number and was answered by Jed Gray. Hi, Jed. Everything okay? Zak spoke softly. Everything is fine, sir. Your appointment for tomorrow is fixed. They said thanks and goodbye, and Zak replaced the receiver knowing that his sick guest had arrived and was settled. Outside the weather had worsened. The men searching the grounds came in one by one. It wasn't possible to make any kind of search in that weather anyway. Whoever had shot Janet Kendall could be miles away by now. But one man stayed behind doing his job, making sure, as far as the driving sleet would allow him, that the killer had got away. The cold was biting through his thick clothing, but the policeman set his teeth, his free hand stuck in his pocket. He kept his gun hand at the ready. His name was Henry Tender, and he was a member of the local murder squad. Somewhere behind him a stone slipped, but Tender tried to tell himself it was only a normal night sound in these lonely grounds. He decided to shrink himself behind a tree skirting the lawn. He would keep watch for a while longer. The gasp he made had no time to change to a scared scream. Steely hands came from behind him, covering his mouth and grabbing his throat. Henry Tender died without knowing why. The killer stayed to lay his victim out on the wet ground, even placing Tender's dead hands across his soaking chest as if he was already laid out in his coffin. Then he went away, not towards the distant road but towards the lighted house that had once belonged to Franklin Harvey, millionaire. At about the same time, Zak Biko was walking slowly and thoughtfully down the stairs towards Colonel Jones. "This is a fine thing, Biko, this woman getting killed with you actually in the room." Jack Jones was working himself up, but Zak placed a cautioning hand on his arm. "Take it easy, sir." The "sir" was for the benefit of others close to them. "I've got the case buttoned up, but we'll break it apart if we move too quickly." His calm quiet words did the trick. "Okay. But we can't wait too long. There's a call out for Tom Larning, by the way. I'm certain he's responsible for every killing that's taken place in this case. That thug you shot in the grounds was one of Larning's hired killers." Jack Jones turned to face Zak. "Who shot that boy, Zak? Do you know?" Zak nodded. "Very soon the kid will tell us if I'm right, Jack. I think you are in for a surprise." The colonel knew Zak Biko. "We'll get Larning anyway. He'll sit in the hot seat. I promise him that." Beckoning to Wilson Keyes, who joined them at once, Zak said to his colonel, "I'll take Keyes, sir. I'd like to take a second look around the bedroom that was used by Franklin Harvey." "See you." Jones watched them climb the broad staircase and knew with certainty that Biko was planning one of his shock finishes. His ace agent would not leave one happening unexplained, nor one guilty party free from the clutches of the law. Inside the great bedroom the two men grinned at each other. "Wills, somewhere in this room there is another cache of raw heroin. I'm sure of it. You won't find it in a cupboard or a drawer, the hiding place will be a cunning one." Wilson Keyes looked skeptical. "How do you know that, Zak?" "From the facts I've gathered. Listen. For the past few years anyway, this rich man, Franklin Harvey, has been in the habit of sending his niece Linda to her room right after supper. His man of all work, Sid Kendall, was left in that hall to admit callers who didn't come to dinner." Wills Keyes nodded, his interest very real now. "So? These after-dark sneakers never stayed long and they each carried a bag of some sort, according to Sid Kendall. You've read the reports about the vast amount of money I found in the study safe?" Keyes grinned. "Lucky, weren't you?" Zak smiled. "Not yet, but soon I'll have all the answers, Keyes. The thing is that this house was used by the gang as something of a clearinghouse. Certain stocks of their filthy powders passed this way. Not all, by any means, but a great deal, was disposed of via the Harvey chain throughout the country. Franklin Harvey must have got careless, or greedy, or both. And you think there's a bigger store of the drugs right here in this room?" Keyes looked about him suspiciously. Zak nodded. "I think the late Franklin Harvey was very much concerned in the drug traffic. I think he got in so deep he couldn't get out. The end result was that one of his own thugs helped him out of this world. I can't say I feel like crying. Let's find that store, Wills. My common sense tells me Franklin Harvey would have wanted his stocks under his eye after dark, and where else but right here in his own room? The house was old as houses like that go. The walls were solid, and the architecture made the place look like a private museum. The bed was also large and solid. The furniture was Victorian and heavy, but the police had gone over all that. The furniture and fittings held no surprises for Zak Biko. The two men began their search, and it was thorough. What furniture could be moved was moved. The clock ticking away on the wall opposite the great bed was removed, and then they found what they were looking for. The clock had been made in the 18th century and brought over from Britain at some time. It didn't want to be taken down from the place it had occupied for so long. Will's keys gave it a jerk and with a clang of annoyance it came away. The clock was a big ornate one, with pictures of cows in a meadow painted on its sides and face. Behind it, set fairly high on the wall, was a pale gray door just a little smaller than the clock itself. Zak called an immediate halt. Both men were pleased. He sent Keys to call the colonel and, while he waited, he lit a cigarette, inhaling the aromatic smoke with satisfaction. Jack Jones stared in disbelief at the gray door and snorted with rage. His bellow was answered by running feet as those men who had been detailed to search this room before were recalled. The haul of raw and dangerous drugs was enormous, and the department had reason to congratulate itself on the outcome of the night's work in spite of the murder of Janet Kendall. The men at work in the Harvey homestead did not know that one of their own number, namely Henry Tender, lay strangled to death under the dripping branches of an old oak outside on the lawn. All this while, despite the tramping of men's feet and the commotion coming from her late uncle's quarters, Linda Harvey made no move to join in. Her door remained closed and the room behind it silent. Zak mentioned this to Colonel Jones. Jack Jones shrugged impatient shoulders. "The girl is probably scared silly, Zak." He shouted orders to his men who were stacking metal tins carefully onto the floor. He spared a minute to face his operative. "You don't think she knows anything more? Linda Harvey is only 20 that I've had her checked already." But Zak Biko had other fish to fry. He signaled to Keys and the two men left the room to talk quietly together in the hall. "I'm going to the Kendalls' bedroom. Sid could be asleep, but with all this going on I doubt it." "He must be stone deaf if he missed that woman's scream," answered Keys grimly. "I'll keep on hearing it in my sleep for years to come. Yet her husband never came down to see what caused it. I scared the living daylights out of him. He could have heard it, but decided Janet was only having hysterics. Let's go and see." The two men climbed the servants' staircase, which was narrower than the main one, and reached the passage. A bar of light showed under the Kendalls' door. Zak tapped firmly, but there was no answering sound. At a nod from the famous black detective, Wilson Keys turned the handle. The two men stepped into what was obviously the Kendalls' bedroom. Sid's unlovely face lay on a pillow. The man looked exhausted and appeared to be sleeping in a state bordering on the unconscious. Leaving Zak Biko to approach the bed, Wilson Keys began exploring the furniture. He made plenty of noise pulling open drawers and cupboards. Zak looked round. "You're wasting time, Wills. All you'll get here is a good look at their underwear." He bent down to shake Sid. For a while, the man on the bed stayed asleep, but at last he stirred and opened bleary eyes. What do you want now?" Zak's quiet answer succeeded in bringing Sid back into the waking world. "I want you, Sid Kendall. Downstairs and fast." Why? "I don't know any more, Biko. Let me alone." Sid's voice rose to a whine, but Zak pulled him to his feet, signaling to Wilson Keys to lend a hand. They started down the narrow staircase, Sid leaning helplessly against their bodies as if unable to use his legs properly. They reached the main landing when a shout from somewhere outside in the gardens held their attention. A prowling guard had stumbled over the body of Henry Tender. Once again, they gathered in the study, but this time Sid Kendall was a member of the party. Zak Biko pushed the houseman into what had been Franklin Harvey's armchair. Colonel Jack Jones sat at the desk which was now cleared for action. He glared up at his agent. "Okay, Zak, start talking. You can clear up this Harvey case, I know it, so don't hedge, man." Zak grinned. "Quite a haul you've got, Colonel." He glanced round at Sid and knew that the matter with Kendall right now was terror. "Harvey's stores throughout the United States, Kendall. They handle groceries and," Zak pushed his hands into his pockets, balancing himself on his heels. His voice was low and full of menace. "And, Sid Kendall, death by delivery. Small packets taken slowly at first but ending in business for the coffin makers." Zak smiled mirthlessly. Sid Kendall sat upright. The room grew cold with tension. You killed Franklin Harvey, didn't you, Sid Kendall? Zak's words cut across the atmosphere like a thrown knife. Sid's strength had returned, his normal kindly, rather helpless, attitude changed into that of a cornered rat. Try proving it, mister. You must be nuts. You were not the leader of the black gang, Sid, but you operated very close to the top, didn't you? You're nuts, I tell you. I'm only the hired help around here. Zak ignored this, and at the desk Colonel Jones, for once, had nothing to say. You know what we found stored away behind the secret door in Franklin's room? Sid shrugged. I don't know anything. You also know the route that Devil's Muck has taken into the interior of America. You'll talk before morning, Sid, make no mistake about that. There was a commotion outside in the hall as Tender's soaking corpse was brought in, but the men in the study paid no attention. Zak was speaking conversationally now. About Jonah Harvey. He was engaged in the same filthy traffic in France 20 years ago, wasn't he, Sid? Without waiting for an answer he went on, and although Jonah's wife Hannah was killed in the crash, it paid Jonah to go to Earth. The French police were getting close to him, and from him the trail would have led back to this house. Zak bent over the now cowering Sid. Jonah married again, somewhere in France. He did not dare to set up a house in America where he might be identified. That boy is Franklin Harvey's nephew, isn't he? Sole heir and beneficiary under his will. The girl upstairs gets nothing. Did you know, Sid? Of course, you did. That's why you had Larning out after him that night. You ordered his death. The girl had to inherit because she, and not Jonah's boy, is the fly in your evil web.